The Subcommittee on Africa will come to order, and good morning to all of you. I do ask unanimous consent that the Representative James from Michigan, Representative Stutzman from Indiana, and Representative Moore from West Virginia be allowed to sit on the dais and participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I yield myself such time as I may consume, and I welcome my ranking member.
Thank you. Good to see you too.
Good to see you too. I want to welcome all of you to this very critical hearing on the systematic and accelerating violence against predominantly Christian communities in Nigeria. For the record, this is my 12th hearing focused exclusively on Nigeria. Trafficking, religious freedom, food insecurity, human rights, focused in part on Africa. I've led 3 trips, human rights trips to Nigeria. I want to thank our distinguished witnesses for being here today to bring light and scrutiny to this unfolding religious freedom catastrophe and to proffer ways to mitigate and to end the violence and the hate. Nigeria is ground zero, the focal point of the most brutal and murderous anti-Christian persecution in the world today. Moderate Muslims who speak out against the radical Islamists or refuse to conform with the serial killers are murdered as well. I applaud President Trump's recent decisive action to redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern for engaging in and tolerating severe violations of religious freedom. One of our witnesses today, Bishop Wilfred Anagbe from the Diocese of Makurdi, testified before our subcommittee last March. He said, in part, militant Fulani herdsmen are terrorists. They steal and vandalize, they kill and boast about it, they kidnap and rape, and they enjoy total impunity from elected officials. None of them have been arrested and brought to justice, close quote. Today, by Zoom, Bishop Anabe will say, in part, on the 13th of March, 2025, when I last appeared before this committee, I warned that the situation was dire and demanded urgent attention. Tragically, the past half year has proven those warnings understated. The continued attacks on vulnerable Christians, villages by the Fulani ethnic militia and their counterparts, both in the middle belt of Nigeria and elsewhere in the country. In my own diocese of Makurdi, you are all familiar with the massacres of Saturday, the 13th of June in Yalawada, where 278 persons, men, women, and children were killed in a manner too gory to describe here by people shouting Allah Akbar, while slaughtering their victims. It took the prayer of the Holy Father, Pope Leo, on Sunday, the 14th of June, for the government of Nigeria to even acknowledge this evil. Even so, the federal government still seeks to downplay the numbers and has yet to properly care for the survivors, even as I speak, as he will be speaking momentarily by way of Zoom. Abductions of the clergy and laity remain rampant. Priests and pastors are prime targets for elimination. In 2015, rescue many of these girls from the oppressive conditions imposed by Sharia law. This past Tuesday, Ambassador Walz also said at a special seminar on Nigeria that the situation in Nigeria now has only grown more dire. He went on to say, churches burn, mothers bury their children for the crime of singing Amazing Grace, pastors are beheaded for preaching the Sermon on the Mount, and entire villages awakened to gunfire simply by calling Jesus their Lord. This is not random violence. It is deliberate persecution as northern militant groups enforce Sharia law and unleash targeted attacks on Christian communities. He also pointed out 25 girls went missing, many of whom who will now vanish and have vanished into the dark underbelly of extremism and sex slavery. Make no mistake, these ongoing attacks are based on religion, and diverting attention from it denies what we have seen with our own eyes. Yeah, there may be other factors, but religion is driving this. Kill the infidel. We see it in other places, and we're seeing it now, sadly, in Nigeria, and it's been going on for many, many years. 13 years ago, in this room, 2012, I chaired a hearing focusing on the slaughter of Christians by Boko Haram, and the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Johnny Carson, testified at that hearing and said, and I quote in part, that the phenomena of Boko Haram is one of discrediting the central government in power for its failure to deliver services to the people. I asked him at the time, "Are you kidding?" I responded by asking why Boko Haram abducts and rapes Christian girls and uses force and coercion, even death, to convert Christians to Islam. On a trip to an IDP camp in Jos, I met many survivors. One man who we had testify here, named Adama, who they took him out of his house. His wife was screaming, "Please don't hurt my husband." They put a AK-47 to his cheek and said, "You renounce your faith or we'll kill you." He said, "Well, I'm ready to meet my Lord." They asked him again. He repeated that, and they shot him. They blew his face very, very horribly. He survived. And when I met him, I invited him to come and testify. He did. And he said, "You've got to realize who Boko Haram is and stop this idea," this is my words, but his sentiment of denial, of saying, it's nothing to see here. So I asked Johnny Carson further, why won't they designate Boko Haram, at least, if not a CPC country, as a foreign terrorist organization? And he said they don't believe it. They're not a foreign terrorist organization. I worked on that for 3 years, additional hearings. On the day I was marking up my bill, and it was called the Boko Haram Terrorist Designation Act of 2013, to put Congress on record demanding an FDO designation, that day, the administration declared Boko Haram a foreign terrorist organization. I was very happy with it, but we could have done that 3 years earlier, maybe had found out what their sources of weapons and funding and everything else might have been, thereby, again, mitigating some of the harm. For too long, the world has looked away, have waged a relentless campaign of terror, murder, and displacement across Nigeria, including the states of Plateau, Benue, and Kaduna. According to Open Doors, and I just want to say something about Open Doors. I've worked with Open Doors for 40 years. I knew the founder, Brother Andrew, an absolutely honest, committed man, and that organization to this day continues all over the world, including in Nigeria. Well, they have said, Open Doors, more Christians are slaughtered in Nigeria than anywhere else in the world. I co-chair the China Commission. I just left a hearing that we're holding over on the Senate side on religious persecution there, against everyone, against the Falun Gong, against the Christians, against the Buddhists in Xinjiang, not the Buddhists, many. They incarcerate and harass more than they slaughter. These groups in Nigeria are doing just that, slaughtering. Another group, as well, every time, and I hope we all will, they're killing those who don't conform to the radical Islamist view, and so they get killed too. I met with many imams on trips to Nigeria as well as here, and they say if we speak out, we'll be firebombed too. During a visit, there are 19,000 churches have also been attacked, more than 7,000 have been murdered in this year alone. During my visit to Jos in 2013, I visited many churches that have been firebombed in Jos. And I listened to the survivors and was moved almost to tears, and to tears with some, when they talked about the numbing loss and pain of losing loved ones. And the churches were decimated, each and every one of them, either by cars coming in and plowing everybody and destroying the physical, or by bombs, and of course, always the ever-present AK-47. They pleaded with their own government and the world to end the cruelty and violence. And I've been raising it, as have many others ever since. About 5 million Christians have been displaced and forced into internally displaced persons camps within Nigeria and refugee camps at regional and sub-regional borders, according to an Inter-Society report. Open Doors reports, and again, I hope we can finally get beyond just saying nothing's to see here. While Christians used to be vulnerable only to Muslim-majority northern states, this violence continues to spread into the Middle Belt and even further south. The attacks are shockingly brutal. Many believers are killed, while women are often kidnapped and targeted for what? Sexual violence, rape, and other abuse. More believers are killed for their faith in Nigeria than anywhere else in the world. These militants also destroy homes, churches, and livelihoods, and many people don't go to school anymore. One estimate is 10,000 schools have been closed due to this violence. The Nigerian government has a fundamental constitutional obligation to protect its own citizens. Yet the brutal reality is that the perpetrators of these crimes operate with impunity. The lack of accountability sends a chilling message that the lives of Christian farmers and their families are expendable. This failure has rightfully been called out by the President of the United States, President Trump, and Secretary of State Rubio. The United States must not stand by idly. I've introduced resolutions, and others have been introduced as well. Res 82, I had done that previously on 82, asking that the Biden administration, we had an interesting conversation and debate on that resolution. It did pass 26 to 21. And part of the argument that was made by Mr. Meeks and my very distinguished colleague to my left is that it's the President and the Secretary of State that needs to make that call, not us. I think we can encourage something. That's what it did. But nevertheless, now they've made the call. And I think we need to, double down and try to stop this. Res 860, which I've introduced, also calls on conditioning U.S. foreign assistance, and it must be tied to progress from the Nigerian government in preventing persecution, prosecuting perpetrators, and protecting all communities. Second, it would provide direct humanitarian assistance, especially the faith-based groups working on the ground in the Middle Belt. What we're hearing is that it's not getting through. People are hungry, so we need to make sure that they're helped. And third, we must impose targeted sanctions pursuant to the Global Magnitsky Act, using visa bans and access freezes against individuals and entities responsible for these gross human rights abuses. President Trump, as I conclude, said, Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. The United States cannot stand by while atrocities are happening in Nigeria. I yield to my good friend and colleague, Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of the witnesses who are going to be testifying today on conflict and religious persecution in Nigeria. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation we'll have with Ambassador Pratt and Deputy Assistant Secretary McGee, as this committee is long overdue to hold a hearing with Trump administration officials. The African continent continues to be both increasingly important and increasingly overlooked. The continent is the youngest in the world, and in Nigeria alone, 70% of the population is under 35, and 40% is under 15. So it represents the future generations who will continue to lead and solve the world's problems. Nigeria has a unique position as a bellwether, as Africa's largest economy, most populous nation, and a significant actor in the region and on the world stage. And meanwhile, Nigeria is facing its own challenges, like rising insecurity, shrinking freedom of expression, and a struggling economy. So let's talk about the very real conflict and violence happening in Nigeria. Nigeria is facing multiple different security challenges in various parts of the country, including violent extremist groups in the Northeast, criminal banditry in the Northwest, and across the country, farmer-herder conflict in the Middle Belt, and other intercommunal violence in central and northern regions. Several factors are driving these conflicts. Yes, ethnicity and religion play a role in some cases, but other dynamics like poor governance, resource competition, climate change, and population pressures are important drivers that need to be addressed. I appreciate the chairman's passion on this and his long work on Nigeria. I think it's a distortion to say that what we're trying to say is that there's nothing to see here. In fact, there is something to see here. There is very real conflict and violence that we need to address. I've been working on addressing conflict in Nigeria since 2013, 2014, when I was part of the counter Boko Haram strategy at the State Department. The violence impacting both Christian and Muslim communities is real, and the Nigerian government can and should do more to address it. I was horrified to learn of the killing of 2 people and the kidnapping of the pastor and a worshiper at a church in Kwara State. And this came only a few days after, as the chairman mentioned, criminal bandits kidnapped 25 girls in Kebbi State. But it is counterproductive to adopt oversimplistic narratives about the multiple complex overlapping security challenges and violence across the country. The victims in the Kebbi State kidnapping were all Muslim girls. So violence affects everyone, and false narratives perpetuate harmful stereotypes and motivate tensions and violence based on religious identity. Distorting what's happening into a solely religious narrative erases the real drivers of violence and makes it harder to implement effective solutions. And it can fuel violence against the very groups the Trump administration claims it wants to protect. That's why I'm alarmed by President Trump's rhetoric about this violence and threats to go into Nigeria, guns a-blazing, and to wipe out terrorists. We are already receiving reports of increased tensions between Christian and Muslim populations following this rhetoric. President Trump's threat is reckless, and any unilateral military action in Nigeria would be illegal. Congress has not authorized force in Nigeria to protect Christians, and any action without Nigeria's consent violates international law. We also know that a military-first response won't actually address the violence and will do very little to protect Christian communities. As I said, I worked on Nigeria policy since I was at the State Department in 2014, so I know firsthand these security challenges are multifaceted, and they require a holistic approach. A military-led approach risks more civilian casualties and impunity, which will only fuel violent extremism more. So we need to use more tools from our foreign policy toolbox if we're serious about helping Nigeria protect its citizens. That means we need to leverage diplomacy and engage with Nigeria on how we can help support their response while pushing for important reforms within Nigeria's institutions. We also need to utilize foreign assistance to fund programs to help prevent violence and address conflict drivers. But the Trump administration so far has hobbled these tools. On the diplomatic front, while I'm glad to see Ambassador Pratt will be here representing the African Affairs Bureau, we still have yet to see even a nomination for an Assistant Secretary for Africa. And we don't have a Senior Director for Africa at the NSC either. There are several emergent conflicts in Africa, including in Nigeria, but also in Sudan, DRC, and across the Sahel and in Ethiopia that demand high-level, consistent, and substantive engagement. Occasional attention from the president, while most of the time welcome, won't be enough to see lasting results on all of these different crises. That bleed, what happens when peace programs go dark. Thank you. This article focuses on a former program implemented by Search for Common Ground, a peace-building organization that provided critical early warning in communities in Yelwata, a region in Nigeria's Middle Belt, where conflict and violence have erupted between Muslim herders and Christian farmers. This early warning program was responsible for fewer violent incidences before Secretary Rubio terminated it. In June, this same community was left in a lurch without this extra early warning support when an attack happened in Makurdi. Nearly 200 people were killed, hundreds burned alive in their homes and market stalls torched, and almost 4,000 people fled. And this is just